Hi folks, I'm Brent Gotsch, Resource Educator with Cornell Cooperative Extension of Ulster County and the Ashokan Watershed Stream Management Program. I'm also on the Board of Directors for the New York State Floodplain and Stormwater Managers Association. Today we're going to learn the basics of how to use a flood insurance study. A flood insurance study, or FIS, is a compilation and presentation of flood risk data for specific watercourses, lakes, and coastal flood hazard areas within a community. The FIS report and associated maps delineate the Special Flood Hazard Area, or SFHA, designate flood risk zones, and establish base flood elevations. If you recall from our previous video, the SFHA is the land area that is expected to be inundated by the waters of the 100-year flood. Depending on where you live, your FIS is designated either for a local municipality, like a town, or on a county-wide basis. Here in Ulster County, New York, our flood insurance studies are recent, so they're done on a county-wide basis. Let's start by looking over some of the more important parts of the FIS. For a county-wide FIS, like we have here in Ulster County, you'll notice that the county itself is highlighted. It also lists all the local communities within the county, which in New York State includes all towns, villages, and cities, as well as their individual community number. This is important because it'll help you reference the community that is contained on the individual flood insurance rate map panel. The table of contents for the FIS outlines all of the available data that is contained within the FIS. A lot of the data is very technical, and in all likelihood the average homeowner will have very little interest in it. Today we're going to concentrate on the most important parts of the FIS for the average homeowner, which will help determine the base flood elevation, or BFE, for their location. Towards the back of the FIS, there will be a series of what are called floodway data tables. If you recall from our previous video on flood insurance rate maps, the floodway is a highly regulated area because of its typically high velocity and dangerous flood flows. Each stream that is mapped in a county has its own separate floodway data table. Today we'll use the example of the Ashokan Creek, since it is a prominent stream in the Ashokan watershed portion of Ulster County. You may notice that the Ashokan Creek is broken up into two separate reaches. This occurs sometimes when there is a large separation between water bodies. In this case, the Ashokan Reservoir divides the Ashokan Creek in two. Reach 1 is located further downstream and empties into the Hudson River. Reach 2 is in the headwaters part of the stream, and it empties into the Ashokan Reservoir. As we learned in the last video, when creating a flood insurance rate map and performing a flood insurance study, one of the methods used to determine flood elevations is by creating cross-sections. This is where land surveyors run a line across the stream channel and use their surveying tools to determine exact elevations at that particular point. Cross-sections are labeled with letters. Basically, surveyors start at the mouth or lowest part of a river or stream and work their way upstream, each cross-section being a different letter of the alphabet. If they run out of letters, they add letters and go sequentially in alphabetical order until their work on that reach of stream is complete. This is the first column of the floodway data table. The second column shows the distance each cross-section is above a certain point in the stream. In this case, it is the number of feet above the confluence with the Ashokan Reservoir. The third column shows the width of the floodway. The fourth column shows the section area in square feet of the floodway. The fifth column shows mean velocity in feet per second for the floodway. The sixth column shows the regulatory base flood elevation. The seventh column shows the BFE without the floodway, and the eighth column shows the BFE with the floodway. The ninth column shows the increase in elevation between the two. It is very easy to find the BFE for a specific cross-section along the stream. You will only need to look at column 1, the cross-section column, and column 6, the regulatory column. For example, on Ashokan Creek Reach 2, the BFE at cross-section A is 598.9 feet. For regulatory purposes, the BFE needs to be measured to the nearest tenth of a foot. If new construction was going into the Special Flood Hazard Area at this point, then the first floor elevation would need to be built to at least this number to comply with federal regulations. Keep in mind that in New York State, there is a 2-foot freeboard requirement. Freeboard is just an extra level of elevation above the BFE. So here in New York, new construction would have to be built to 600.9 feet. As you can see, it's pretty easy to find a BFE right at a cross-section. However, most locations are going to be found in between cross-sections. In order to find those BFEs, you're going to need to use a tool called the flood profile. The flood profile is usually found in Volume 2 of the FIS. Just like the floodway data tables, there's at least one profile, and usually several profiles, of each map stream. We'll look at the profile for the section of Esopus Creek Reach 2 that has cross-section A on it to keep it consistent with the floodway data table we are using. You'll notice that the flood profile looks like a basic graph. It has both an X and a Y axis. The X-axis shows linear feet. In this case, the stream distance in feet above the confluence with the Ashokan Reservoir. The Y-axis shows elevation in feet. You'll notice that the X-axis is broken up into small boxes. While it varies from profile to profile, generally the small boxes represent 50 feet. Occasionally there will be a big box that includes 10 little boxes, which would mean there is 500 feet in the big box. While this is the case here, this is not universal, and you should always check the boxes and look at the distance on the X-axis. The Y-axis is usually in 1 to 2 foot increments. In our example, each box on the Y-axis equals 1 foot. You'll also notice that there are several different types of lines in the profile, all with a different combination of dots and dashes. The bottom line represents the stream bed. The next line above that represents the 10% annual chance, or 10-year flood. The line above that represents the 4% annual chance, or 25-year flood. The next higher line represents the 2% annual chance, or 50-year flood. The next line represents the 1% annual chance, or 100-year flood. Finally, the top line represents the 0.2% annual chance, or 500-year flood. While there may be reasons to find the flood elevations for each of these flood return intervals, if you're looking for the BFE, then you will want to use the 1% annual chance flood line. While simple in concept, it can be difficult in practice to find the BFE using the flood profile. In order to do that, you will have to determine how far up or downstream your location is from the nearest cross-section. To keep things simple, let's say the hypothetical location we're looking for is 50 feet upstream of cross-section B. In the flood profile, the further right you go, the further upstream you are, and you will see the elevations of each of the flood return intervals be higher. Before we go any further, if you're doing this on your own, I recommend printing out a copy of the flood profile, preferably on 11 by 17 size paper. 8.5 by 11 size paper will work too, but it'll be easier to see on the larger paper. Be sure to use an engineer's scale, ruler, or other straight edge, and pencil to draw your lines. In our example, we will assume that the location along the stream that we need to get the BFE for is 50 feet above cross-section B. That means we will need to go one box, or 50 feet, to the right of cross-section B when looking at the flood profile. Then we will travel up the profile until we intersect with the 1% annual chance flood line. Then travel over to the Y-axis. It doesn't matter if you go to the far left or far right Y-axis, but I recommend going to the closest one possible to reduce errors. Where that line intersects with the Y-axis, that is your BFE. It appears that the BFE for this spot is just below 617 feet, which makes sense since if we look at the floodway data table, the BFE for cross-section B is near that number. It's very difficult to get a completely accurate reading of the BFE using the flood profile alone, especially for those who are not experienced with it. Even experts struggle with trying to get to the nearest tenth of a foot. Estimates, especially if they go a bit above the elevation, are fine if you're in the early stages of planning a construction project. But if you decide to go ahead with one, you'll need an accurate BFE. My advice to people who really need to get an accurate BFE is to hire a professional land surveyor to complete an elevation certificate for you. That is the only way to get a truly accurate BFE for your particular part of the floodplain. I hope to have a future video about elevation certificates that will explain those in more detail. I hope that after today you have a better understanding of flood insurance studies, floodway data tables, flood profiles, and how to calculate BFEs. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.